Okay, 4b, we're graphing. So again, number 4 is going to either be a cosine or a sine graph. One of those two. There won't be tangent, secant, cosecant, and cotangent. None of those will be on there. So for these, the formulas that you want to know, I'll put these up again. The formula for your period is 2 pi over b. The amplitude is absolute value of a. Phase shift is opposite sine of c over b. Your a is the number in front of the trig function, your b is in front of the x, and your c value will come after the x. We have to know these formulas on this, so these formulas you definitely want to have on your note card. We're going to put this in based on the numbers that are given here. This is going to be 2 pi over b, which is 2 pi over 5/4. Now we're going to flip and multiply this, so we get 2 pi over 1 times 4/5. And when you multiply across the top, across the bottom, you're going to get 8 pi over 5. So this is going to be our period, 8 pi over 5. Okay, next is amplitude, which is going to be the absolute value of a. In this case, it's the absolute value of 3, which is going to be 3. For the phase shift, opposite sine of c over b. It's opposite sign of the number you see inside the parentheses. That's what it means by opposite sign. So if you see a plus there, that means it's going to be a minus. So we're going to get negative pi over 4. That's opposite sign of c. b is 5/4. Okay. If we flip and multiply this, negative pi over 4 times 4/5, you get negative pi over 5. Okay, so that would be the three things that they're asking on the test. Now, as I mentioned before, one more thing that you want to find, which will make it easier for graphing, is you want to find the quarter point. I'll do that up here. QP, quarter point, is equal to the period divided by 4. In this case, we're doing 8 pi over 5, and we're going to be dividing this by 4. This is going to tell you how much you have to add to find the next key point. We know the first one's going to be negative pi over 5, but we have to keep adding a certain number to get the next key points. And so that's going to be this number here. When you flip and multiply on that one, you're going to do 8 pi over 5 times 1/4. And what you'll end up with is 2 pi over 5 when you flip and multiply, because we can reduce the 8 and the 4. So you'll get, when you do that one, you'll get 2 pi over 5 as your quarter point. Okay, so 2 pi over 5 is what we're going to add every single time all the way across here. So now that we have, hopefully have all this, I'm going to erase all this, and then I'm going to now do the graph. So I have negative pi over 5. Now let me just go ahead and show you again what it is that we're actually doing to get the key points. So here's the first one, negative pi over 5, that's your phase shift. We're going to add to that the quarter point, which is 2 pi over 5. So I'm going to add 2 pi over 5 to this, and I get positive pi over 5. Well, then we're going to take pi over 5, we're going to add another 2 pi over 5 to it, we get 3 pi over 5, and then 3 pi over 5, plus another key point, that's going to give us 5 pi over 5, and then finally we get 5 pi over 5 plus 2 pi over 5, and we get 7 pi over 5, which is the last key point. So this is going to be all the other key points that you're going to have for this one. And so this is actually what you're doing. As I mentioned before, when you draw these, you want to make sure you label all your key points to get full credit for this problem. Now the first one here was negative pi over 5. That was your phase shift that you have. Here is the next one that we added, pi over 5. And then we have basically these other ones here. So pi over 5, 3 pi over 5, 5 pi over 5, 7 pi over 5, just like that. So here's all, that was all the other key points that we found just by adding the quarter point. So basically the distance from here to here is your quarter point. Okay, so these are all labeled. Next we want to take a look. We notice that we have a sine graph that's there. Let me go ahead and mark the y-axis here for our amplitude. Now for sine graphs always begin on the x-axis, but we have to start it at our phase shift. So we start it at the phase shift, negative pi over 5, on the x-axis. If it's positive, we go up. If we have a negative in front of the sign, we go down. This one happens to be positive, so we're going to begin by going up. So the very next key point we have has to go up to the amplitude. Next one's going to drop down to the x-axis. Then it'll go down again to the amplitude. It always alternates. Amplitude, x-axis, and so forth. So the last one is going to end up here on the x-axis. The graph itself is going to go look like this. Don't forget again that we're going to put our arrows on each end to indicate that it does continue. Where we're just looking at one cycle, one period of this, and that's all it's going to ask in the actual test. Just ask you to do one period or one cycle.